this Maltese.
Well, welcome once again to Calaveras Living. Today is really an important show, and I hope you enjoy it. Stay tuned and learn something about what's happening in the country. Congressman McClintok is with us on today's program, and of course he represents us in this area and the whole 4th Congressional District, which is pretty large. Congressman, it's good to see you.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me, John.
And of course the sessions, things are going to start getting in session again shortly, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes, and I think at the top of the list is going to be Obamacare and this lousy economy. That's what I keep hearing about from everybody across the district. Those are the two things that pop up in virtually every conversation. So I expect that the Congress is going to have a good deal to say about that this year.
Oh, I think so. And I think everybody out there would really much agree with you that, everybody is talking about, that's not a generalization, it's really true that hardly anybody isn't concerned with Obamacare. They don't understand it. It's confusing. Certain people are privileged. So what are your comments on it? What do you see happening?
It's been a disaster from the beginning, and everything that we warned would happen is now coming about. Up until its rollout, it was a theoretical discussion. 85% of the American people liked their health plans. They were promised by nobody less than the President of the United States that if they liked them, they could keep them. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor.
That was pretty clear,
So everybody tuned out of the conversation and said, great, well then this doesn't involve me, and if it helps some other people, even better. So now they're learning that was all a lie. More than 6 million Americans have lost their policies because of Obamacare. At last count, about 2 million people had signed up for Obamacare plans, and of those 2 million, 2/3 were simply trying to replace the plans that they had, they liked, and they lost because of Obamacare. Yeah. About half of the folks who've gone to the website have been shunted into Medicaid, which is the poverty program that a lot of folks are desperate to try to stay out of. According to a major medical study, you've got about the same health outcome on Medicaid as you have not being insured at all. And if you doubt that, I just had my office do a quick survey of local GPs in the Roseville area around our district office. They reported of the 40 GPs in the area, only 4 would see a Medicaid patient, and the soonest you could get an appointment was 2 weeks. I then had them call around veterinarians. Every veterinarian would see your dog, and the longest you had to wait was the next morning. So that's the difference that government can make in screwing up what was once the most accessible, affordable, and advanced healthcare system in the history of the world.
Well, in addition to that, too, a lot of doctors say they're going to retire. I mean, when they get even close to retirement, they said, I'm getting out of this.
Well, this is just the first round of shocks. The massive rate increases that people are experiencing and the loss of their plans if they're in the individual market. Next is coming all of those folks who get their insurance through their employer. Employers are now dropping plans. It was Target just within the last few days announced that they were dropping their health care plans because of Obamacare. All of those folks are now adrift in the Obamacare world and are finding that to replace those policies that they had, they liked, and they wanted to keep, they're now finding out that they're going to be paying much, much more for them. And then they're going to start showing up at the doctor's office and finding a couple of other things. Number one, they might not actually be signed up because of all the problems with the website. And if they are signed up, they may arrive at the doctor's office only to find the doctor is not a part of Obamacare. They've lost their doctor as well. And then you're going to see another major rate increase later this year because they're not signing up the folks that they need to subsidize the rest of the system. It is a great, big mess, and it affects the health care of every American. And now it's no longer a theoretical discussion. Every American is having an experience, and the vast, vast majority of them are realizing this was a giant step backward, and that they were lied to by the president.
What do you see happening? Is this going to be solved, or is it going to be repealed? Is
Oh,
it going to be changed?
I think it's only a matter of time before it will be repealed lock, stock, and barrel.
I think that's what people want to hear.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it has to, because otherwise it will collapse on them.
Because it is. I mean, a mess is an understatement.
Just up here, for example, I was at the Mark Twain Medical Center a few weeks ago, and what they were telling me was this. You know, they have a disproportionate share of poor people. Their costs when these folks arrive at the hospital are underwritten by the disproportionate care program of the federal government. Well, that's all being eliminated now under Obamacare, because under the pretext of, well, these folks will now have their own insurance. But that insurance has huge, huge deductibles. So the hospital's telling me they're going to show up, we're going to hand them a bill for $5,000. They're going to say, we don't have that kind of money. We used to get reimbursed for that through the disproportionate care program. We've lost that. We're going to have to eat it. We might not be able to keep our doors open. I mean, there are so many different unintended consequences to Obamacare. It cannot last.
Who's leading the fight really in Congress against this? I know not many of the senators.
A group of doctors in the House, led by Dr. Tom Price of Georgia, have put together a reform plan that restores all of the good things about the American health care system and fixes its flaws. It puts the patients back in charge of their own health care. For example, we give huge, huge tax advantages to companies to buy plans for their employees. Why don't we give those same tax advantages to the employees themselves so the employee can choose what plan best meets their family's needs?
So it's a sensible
Expand
plan.
the health savings account so that people can meet their medical costs with pre-tax income rather than having to pay a tax on it and then with what's left try to meet their health care needs. Why don't we let them shop across state lines? If you can find a policy that better fits your needs at a lower cost that's issued out of another state, why shouldn't you be able to purchase that plan? Why aren't we going after the cost drivers like medical malpractice that are driving up rates so dramatically? These are all fundamental changes that are desperately needed. And by the way, most of the flaws in the old health care system were created by government. They weren't alleviated by it. Ronald Reagan was right when he said that the government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. And you look at so many of the failings in the old health care system, they were created by government.
Well, I think we can all agree with you on Obamacare. What other concerns do you have as you go into session? Well, other problems facing the nation? We've
now completed 5 years of policies that have increased the nation's debt by, about $7 trillion, all on the pretext that they were going to jumpstart the economy. 5 years later, we continue to languish in a de facto recession. These have not been happy years for America. The sad thing is, we know how to fix an economy. We know how to revive an economy. We've done so many times before. And when people say, well, this is the worst economy since the Great Depression, I remember a time more recently when we had double-digit unemployment, double-digit inflation, mile-long lines around gas stations, and interest rates at 21.5%. That was the end of the Carter administration. We don't remember that very vividly because those days didn't last very long. We elected Ronald Reagan. He reduced the tax and regulatory burdens and the spending of the federal government relative to GDP that were crushing the economy, and we had a period of explosive economic growth. Same thing happened when Jack Kennedy did it in the early 1960s, or Harry Truman in the mid-1940s. Bill Clinton cut federal spending by a miraculous 4% of GDP. He signed what amounted to the biggest capital gains tax cut in American history. He attacked entitlement spending and abolished that open-ended welfare system we had at the time, and the period was expansive economic growth. So we know how to fix an economy. The problem is this administration has been pursuing exactly the opposite policies and has had exactly the opposite result.
So the economy, the whole budget problem continues too, right?
Oh, yes, and unfortunately is once again getting worse. We at least had the sequester, which was not a radical notion. It was less than 1/3 of the deficit reduction that Standard & Poor's at the time warned was necessary to preserve the AAA credit rating. I opposed it for that reason, because it wasn't enough to preserve our credit rating. But at least it was something. And ultimately, the only meaningful constraint on government spending, it was slowly bringing it down. And of course, that was all lost as a result of last December's budget and now the appropriations bill that was adopted 2 weeks ago.
Okay. What's another concern? I hate to keep saying, I'd hate to, do you sleep at night?
Well, if you want a third in this litany of distress, of course, we have the drought. And droughts are a natural phenomenon. They occur from time to time. That's why we build dams and reservoirs, so that water in plentiful times is going to be there in drought years. Unfortunately, we haven't built a major new reservoir in California of over 1 million acre-feet since 1979 and the new Malones Dam. We have a radical and retrograde ideology that has not only blocked new dam construction, they're actually trying to tear down existing dams. And now we have a drought and we've got no water stored behind those reservoirs. One of the great frustrations I had this fall was watching the Sacramento River at full flood as they released water to meet environmental and flood control regulations into the ocean that could right now be sitting behind those dams and available for folks in this period of distress. And it's not there.
The river's so low. I mean, you could walk across parts of it.
Well, now it is, but in the fall they were releasing massive amounts of water. I mean, you've seen the pictures of a Folsom, you can't call it a lake anymore, a Folsom Pond. I flew over it the other day. It is absolutely appalling. If we had finished construction of the Auburn Dam upriver, we wouldn't have that problem today. That would have been 2.3 million acre-feet of additional water. That's enough water to meet the annual needs of more than 2 million households. We would have had 800 megawatts of the cleanest, cheapest electricity available. That's enough for over 1 million households. And the Auburn Dam would have provided 400-year flood protection to the Sacramento Delta. Interestingly, we've been spending billions of dollars on these levees. The levees only protect the Delta against a 200-year flood. The Auburn Dam by itself would protect the same Delta against a 400-year flood. We did all of the really heavy lifting in constructing that dam in the mid-1970s. We cut the footings for it, we cut the diversion tunnels. That's the tough part of building a dam. The rest is just pouring concrete. They walked away from that dam, abandoned it literally in mid-construction. Had it been completed, we wouldn't be talking about a severe water shortage this year.
You yourself, as a congressman, can get involved in basically a state issue like that?
Well, this is a federal issue because that's a federal, that would have been a federal dam. The problem is...
But I mean the whole drought problem?
Oh, yes. Again, the federal, I chair the Water and Power Subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee. That has jurisdiction over all of Bureau of Reclamation dams in the western United States, including the Auburn, which would have been a Bureau of Reclamation project. Still is. I mean, the Bureau still owns that land. But, you know, it's sad because you can see we're now living with the effect of all of these policies, and it's not good.
Well, it's tragic. Now, considering how long you've represented the 4th District, demographics, of course, have changed over the years that you've been representing the district. How has that affected how you represent your constituents? Actually,
not much. You're right. There was a huge shift in territory. The district population is essentially centered in Placer and El Dorado counties. It used to run all the way north to the Oregon border. In the reapportionment, it was shifted south. So we still have Placer and El Dorado counties, but now it's
down to Fresno.
Shifted exactly right down to Kings Canyon. So, but the issues are very much the same. I mean, instead of dealing with the northern Sierras, we're dealing with the northern and central Sierras.
Is there more immigration of legal and illegal immigrants in the southern portion of the district?
Well, that's mainly into the cities and into the Central Valley is where we're seeing that.
Okay.
And that's a huge problem. It's going to be a major bone of contention when the Congress gets busy in the next several months. my personal view is pretty simple, and that is that our immigration laws were not written to keep people out. They were written to assure that as immigrants come to America, that they assimilate into American society, that they acquire a common language and a common culture and a common appreciation of American constitutional principles. They renounce their loyalties to their former nation and adopt America as their own. Illegal immigration undermines that whole process of legal immigration that makes assimilation possible in the first place.
It's hard on everybody, actually.
Oh, yeah, and the people who are the maddest about it that I talk to
are the legal ones.
Exactly right. Our legal immigrants who obeyed all of our laws, who respected our nation's sovereignty, who did everything our country asked of them to do, including waiting for years patiently in line, and they're now watching 11 to 20 million people try and cut in line in front of them. You bet they're angry.
Okay. You mentioned a common language, too. There's some people upset, some people I've met around here who are upset about the language, that, learning the language, having a comman language brings everybody together.
Oh, exactly. That's the glue that holds together any society.
It says in the California Constitution that English is the official language, and that Congress, the legislators should not interfere with that and should do everything to encourage that. Yet, ballots are printed in Spanish, other things are printed in Spanish, and taxpayers resent having to pay for that.
Well, not only that, but think about the damage that does to the political debate. If we all can't talk to one another as Americans, how can we arrive at a common direction for our country? A basic requirement of citizenship in order to vote is to be fluent in English, and it's precisely for that reason, so that you can understand the debate that's going on, understand the issues, and that you can talk to one another in a common language. The federal laws that require multilingual ballots essentially are suggesting that those who are voting are not engaged in that debate with every other American.
They can't be assimilated, really, either.
Well, exactly right. Exactly. I mean, again, how do you create one great nation from all of the nations of the world? Well, there's a certain glue that is a social glue that is involved, and the most fundamental is the ability to talk with one another. That's why we have one language, the English language. That's why we require every immigrant to demonstrate a proficiency in English before they can be accorded citizenship.
But evidently California's not doing that, though?
Well, it's not just California. This is a federal law that requires the bilingual ballots, and it's a law that needs to be changed. We've tried to change it on occasion without result.
Who's fighting that in Sacramento?
Well, again, it's not Sacramento. It's Washington where that requirement is for multilingual ballots. The people of California spoke overwhelmingly on English as the official language and adopted a measure to do so because the legislature itself would not act. I did carry a measure in the legislature to do so. It was rejected on a straight party line vote.
Now, another thing that's because the internet is becoming so of interest to everyone and performs such a function, the idea to tax sales on the internet, what's your feeling on that?
Well, the retailers feel that they're at a terrible disadvantage because if you buy from them, you have to pay, I believe is now the highest sales tax in the country here in California, almost 10%. I think it's over 10% in some jurisdictions. But if you buy it off the internet, there's no sales tax, and that 10% margin for a retailer is huge. My problem with extending the sales tax to internet sales is this. Number one, the whole purpose of the sales tax is to, at least the stated purpose, was to pay for all of the infrastructure that's necessary to support that shop. The police protection, the fire protection, the road, the parking, everything that is necessary to protect that shop, to bring people to it, the water and power, everything. That's supposed to be supported by the sales tax. An internet business doesn't incur any of those costs and therefore shouldn't be required to pay for those costs. The other issue that's involved is a more esoteric one, but it has a practical application. As long as people can avoid paying a sales tax by going out on the internet, there is a natural limit to how much a state can increase the tax before it becomes counterproductive. Apply the sales tax to internet sales, and you've lost that containment mechanism, and states are then free to ratchet up their taxes as high, and literally till the pips squeak, as they say. I would prefer instead because I do think the retailers have a legitimate point that they're at a competitive disadvantage.
Sure.
Why shouldn't a retailer be allowed to set up a parallel internet site to sell the same wares that they sell in their store, and also not have to pay the sales tax? Under current law, a retailer who says, okay, I'm going to set up an internet site so that people can also shop, can buy my stuff on the internet, they still have to pay the sales tax. And they have to charge the sales tax because because they have a physical presence in the state. I think we ought to get rid of that requirement and simply say, you want to sell on the internet, no sales tax, even if you're selling it out of your local shop.
So some would want to do that and some wouldn't.
Yeah, in fact, I talked to a major retailer who said that would fix pretty much all of his problems. He's tried to set up an internet site, but the problem is because he also has stores in California that he does not want to give up, he has to pay. He has to charge a California sales tax. He ought to be, he ought to be allowed to compete on the internet on an equal footing with every out-of-state seller.
That makes sense. So, what are some of the other things that you're facing when you go back into the session? Things that are on your mind that you would like to help solve?
I think there's an overarching question that goes beyond all of the immediate concerns that we're talking about, and that is the preservation of the American Constitution itself. Our Constitution was very painstakingly established to protect our liberty. That's the reason why it is written the way it is. We divide up the functions of government to assure that one branch cannot become abusive of the others. That is why, under Article 1 of the Constitution, all legislative authority is vested in the Congress. The Congress makes those decisions for some very good reasons. You've got 535 members between the House and the Senate, representing very, very diverse constituencies and many, many different viewpoints across the country. You want all of those voices heard in the debate that leads to a decision to enact a law. The much smaller Article 2 establishes the president, and much of that, by the way, is about the election of the president, not his powers. The principal provision on his powers is to see that the laws be faithfully executed. That means that the president cannot legislate himself. It means that the president cannot choose one law to enforce and another law not to enforce. It means that he is not allowed to pick a person that has to obey the law and one that does not. And
that's been taken advantage of.
It's been taken advantage of to the point where I think it's breaking down the entire separation of powers that is at the very heart of our Constitution. This president almost plunged our nation into a war with Syria unprovoked, without any kind of congressional authority. That was crossing a very bright line. Fortunately, he backed down. But he's doing the same thing domestically. On immigration law, he's chosen simply, I've had so many illegal immigrants come to me and say, well, I'm legal now. And I said, under what authority? Oh, the president says so. The president doesn't have that authority. And the thing that concerns me is that Constitution is written the way it is to protect our freedom. If we tolerate its abuse, the way we've been seeing under this administration, and the last one too, it didn't start with this one. My beef with Barack Obama is not that he changed George W. Bush's policies. My beef is that he did not change them. He took the worst of them and he doubled down on them. But it is now proceeding to the point where we're approaching a constitutional crisis. The Roman Republic didn't fall by one act. It was a long chain of usurpations by the executive of functions that had been vested for centuries with the legislative branch of their government. 400 years after the fall of the Roman Republic, the Roman Senate continued to meet, but it no longer meant anything. It was like a rotting porch. You could still discern the shape, but the structure that actually supported it had been rotted from within because of these continued usurpations by the executive of the legislative. We cannot allow that to happen to the American Republic.
Well, and unfortunately, I think even the general public can see the decline.
I think they're starting to, and that's important because all of the laws that are passed under the Constitution have a huge enforcement bureaucracy. You break any of those laws, a policeman is going to ultimately show up at your door with a gun. The Constitution doesn't have that enforcement mechanism. The Constitution was designed to be self-enforcing. One branch's ambitions checked by the other. If that structure breaks down, the only way to restore it is through the owners of that Constitution, we the people, through the ballots that we cast for our elected representatives, we have to insist that they abide by, obey, and respect that Constitution, and they show through their votes a consistent fidelity to that Constitution. And ultimately that comes down to we the people. We own that document, not the government, and it's up to us to insist that it be enforced.
Well, I think we need more procedures or more suggestions to the public as to how they can do that, besides the pressure that they normally put on.
Well, but that goes on in every debate that occurs across America. You know, the debates in Washington are just a reflection of the real debate. The real debate's going on over backyard fences and family dinner tables and, you know, coffee at Starbucks. That's where the future of the country is being decided.
A lot of people feel frustrated, though.
Oh, I know. Oh, absolutely they do. But you know, our process is infuriatingly slow as it sometimes can be, ultimately works. That great debate is going on right now among the American people, and how it's resolved will determine whether we restore those uniquely American principles of individual liberty, constitutionally limited government, and personal responsibility that produced the happiest and most prosperous republic in the history of the world, or whether our nation simply becomes another failed socialist state. That's the basic crossroads we're at. That's what's being decided right now by all of those conversations among the American people.
Yeah. Just in closing, a couple of comments about the media. Do you get fair coverage?
Well, you know, no, but
No.
but
Is that your
you know,
answer?
but look, who was it who said? I think it was John Kennedy said, "Life isn't fair." Everybody has a particular viewpoint. They express those viewpoints, and as Thomas Jefferson said, "Error of opinion may be tolerated where reason is free to combat it." And as long as we retain that freedom to present our views in a public forum, all of those biases that we see in the media generally tend to cancel themselves out.
Oh, well, that's interesting to hear you say that. Do you believe the unemployment figures that are put out by the federal government?
I believe that they measure what they say they measure. They go, let me put it this way. What they do is they ask you, are you looking for work or are you employed? If you're looking for work and you're not employed, you're considered unemployed. That's currently 6.7%. But those figures mask the real suffering that's going on out there. For example, if you've been cut back to 29 hours a week because of Obamacare, you're considered fully employed. You know, if you're working at a minimum wage job with a college degree, you're considered fully employed. And by the way, if you really want to work but you've simply given up looking, you're no longer included in the unemployment count.
Work, yeah.
So once you adjust for those factors, the unemployment rate is double-digit right now.
It's around 11 or so, isn't it?
Actually, I think between 11 and 14, okay. I forget. But there was actually one study that purported to take all of these factors into account and reported 37% unemployment. Now, I think that that's overstating it, but I think that the official numbers are greatly understating it.
Okay. Well, it's sure good to see you, and I'm glad you're still employed.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I wish, I mean, you must have so many things in your mind, you know, as you go to work each day or come and make visits like this, you know, and it's good that you get back on weekends to visit your district.
Well, I tell you, I get more guidance, you know, just talking to folks, and because I know what's on their minds because they're telling me every place I go, and it's Obamacare, it is the stinking economy, it's a growing concern over the drought, and it's that overarching question, are we losing our country?
Okay, well, thanks for coming, and have a good trip back to Washington soon, and then come back and see us on weekends.
I'll look forward to it, John. Thank you for having me.
That's Congressman Tom McClintok, and if you're not involved, considering the conditions of the country, you better become more involved. See you next time.